All right, welcome everyone. My name is Jessica Stender, and I'm the Policy Director and Deputy Legal Director at Equal Rights Advocates and proud co-chair of the Stronger California Advocates Network. And just to give a bit of a background on Stronger California, we have now been around for 10 years. We take a cross-sector approach to advancing economic security for women, families, and communities throughout California. We do this in a comprehensive way. So we look at the kind of various barriers and obstacles that face women and families and communities to achieving economic security. And we try to pass policies to address those barriers and advance economic security. One of the core priorities on the Stronger California agenda is combating poverty and building assets. Some of our past Stronger California wins in this regard include changes to CalWORKS, the state program that provides temporary financial assistance services to eligible California families with children and tries to better support families in combating poverty. Our goal in Stronger California has been to improve these systems to ensure they are not punitive and that they recognize that both structural and societal contributions to poverty exist. And really, we need policies that address those broader structural reasons for poverty and contributors to poverty. One just example of a past Stronger California win in this regard was getting rid of what was called the maximum family grant rule, which was a punitive rule that really just punished families who were living in poverty by denying additional benefits when they had a new child if they were already on CalWORKS. After a multi-year fight, Stronger California was proud to be part of the effort to end that maximum family grant rule. We're going to be talking today about a really exciting budget win that we secured this year, as well as upcoming budget efforts that we anticipate in this anti-poverty space, and how we can reimagine the broader ways in which the state addresses and combats poverty, since we know that poverty is a matter of policy choice. So I'm really excited to be here today with Andrew Cheyne, who is the Managing Director of Public Policy at Grace and Child Poverty, which is an organization leading efforts in the anti-poverty space and also a lead organization in Stronger California. So Andrew, before we get into the specifics of the budget win we're going to focus on today, can you start us off at a higher level to talk a bit about the importance of CalWORKS and other critical safety net programs? What do they do? Who do they serve? And why is it so important that we secure budget funding for these programs?
Well, thank you so much for having me. Again, my name's Andrew Cheyne. I'm with Grace and Child Poverty California. And just first of all, thank you, Jessica, personally. Thanks to ERA, to the Stronger California Network. We firmly believe that we are stronger together, and we are only going to win through multi-sector solidarity. And so we're just really honored to be a part of the Stronger California coalition, and appreciate working with you all. As you described, our safety net is incredibly important to children and families and disproportionately impacts and serves women, especially Black and brown women who've already experienced all of the forms of racism, of patriarchy and misogyny in our workforce, in our education systems. As Stronger California always puts forward, we are so far from equal pay amongst every other form of economic and gender justice, and that really shows up in our safety net. So just to give you one example with CalWORKS, approximately 90% of the families are led by women and are almost exclusively Black and Latina mothers. Deeply overrepresented because, again, they have already faced the structural forms of oppression in our labor, in our education, and other systems, which are some of those conditions that you described in terms of those structural factors of why we have the conditions of poverty that we do today. And yet, programs like CalWORKS, as you described, which is our core cash and supportive services safety net, along with other programs like CalFresh, which provides food assistance, our tax credits, the school meals for all, which California led the way. Without those programs, we would not only have millions of more families experiencing poverty, but our racial disparities of who's experiencing poverty, those injustices would be even greater. And so it's thanks to the safety net that we are able to prevent poverty for so many children and families. As we're going to describe, many of these campaigns are to really have a family-centered, anti-racist, and trauma-informed experience that our families deserve as they're building pathways out of poverty. So just to give you one example of what this can look like, one of the parents who was a really big part of the campaign this year, I'm not going to use her name, but it was someone who lives honestly not that far from me here in the East Bay, and unfortunately not only experienced poverty but street homelessness with her girls, and was able to get supports through the CalWORKS program, was able to find housing, and it's just hard to describe the power of the advocacy of lived experts that she and so many others pushed back and said, we're not going to allow the state to balance the budget on the backs of our poorest Californians. And I'm living proof of what the safety net can do and helping people turn their lives around. And it was just incredible to see that advocacy in action. And I was really proud to be a part of that.
Thank you so much for sharing the story of that parent. We are so proud to have so many community-based advocates, including parents, as part of Stronger California's work to advocate for policies to advance economic security. And that actually leads us into the next question, which is if you could talk a bit about the budget win that we celebrated this year in this anti-poverty space, which we know was led by and reinforced by parents and other community members who were directly affected by these potential budget cuts.
Thank you for the question. This was an incredibly challenging year. The state's economy, unlike other recessions, was not unlike other deficits, excuse me, we were not in a deep recession. But unfortunately, the projections for the state's revenues were far above what was coming in. There obviously had been a lot of disruptions to the economy, to the state's finances, through the COVID-19 pandemic and coming out of that. And so it was very challenging to sort of anticipate what the future would look like. And nevertheless, the state must pass a balanced budget. And unfortunately, it has been the case that the state has frequently closed its budget deficit, including by cutting core programs, by cutting safety net programs. That often takes the form of cutting core cash grants, such as to CalWORKS, to a program called SSI, Supplemental Security Income, and other programs that also provide supportive services like housing or childcare or domestic violence survivors or substance abuse, a whole variety of programs that the state absolutely has stood up and wants to continue funding, but faces hard choices. And due to the advocacy that I mentioned, and really want to lift up the community-led advocacy that Stronger California puts forward and End Child Poverty is proud to support, it was really deeply a traumatic year because there were so many folks who were coming forward speaking about the experiences that they'd had in poverty and what the safety net had meant to them. And the fact that programs like CalWORKS, like childcare, programs serving foster youth, the in-home supportive services, very basic home health care, allowing people to be in their homes, especially when they're facing significant illness, what it would really mean if these programs were cut. Just one story from a youth in the Central Valley, spoke about how her father was a farm worker and had fallen and become injured and was not able to continue his livelihood. And in addition to everything else, that they had sought help through the CalWORKS program, and that if the cuts were made, that she was not going to be able to continue her education, that she was going to have to work to support her siblings and her family. And I really can't convey in a video like this how deeply impactful that was to hear, but also the trauma and the rawness to hear a young person be able to communicate that with such power. And so what was really impactful that we were able to do through End Child Poverty and in partnership with Stronger California and others was to really link arms with all the programs and say, even though we may be focused on a particular program, we have expertise in this, or our families are, enrolled in that program. We are just here to say, hands off, no cuts, no delays to any of these programs, because these are the same families who are accessing different forms of assistance. And we are here with a united front. And so it was community-based organizations, it was providers, it was the labor workforce who deliver these programs, county administrators. Everyone stood arm in arm to protect these programs. And we won. It was literally the first time since Ronald Reagan was governor, which is before he was president, that the state never had balanced its budget in this way. And we need to give credit where credit's due. The governor, Newsom, and his team, right? We know where they are. They have done so much for these programs over the years. Importantly, they never proposed to cut any of the core cash grants. And that was really significant because those are huge parts of the state budget. Unfortunately, they were looking at hard choices around a lot of these other programs and services. And so we are deeply grateful to the legislature, to the speaker and the pro tem, to budget chair Gabriel and Weiner, to fierce leaders like Senator Menjivar, Dr. Jackson, and others who insisted that the legislature was going to restore those cuts. And thankfully, we're able to work with the governor and the administration on a budget where, yes, there were some reductions in funding if a program wasn't fully expending all of its resources, and we need to watch that and make those restorations. But there were no sorts of the cuts that were proposed. And so all of those services are still available and gives us a foundation to come out of. And so we're really here to celebrate the partnerships and the work that was done, led by community, that deep advocacy I described, and the fact that we now have a blueprint, that we are going to reject the failed policies of austerity, and that we are going to make decisions that really, walk the walk of the values, that poverty is a policy choice. We have the tools to end it. And when hard times come, that we have a way to protect Californians who face the most extreme circumstances and prioritize them.
Amen to all of that. It is, I think, sometimes easy to get lost in the numbers, literally, when budget discussions are happening, because it is very in the weeds. There is a lot of detail. There are a lot of very long hearings. And I just so appreciate you, Andrew, Grace and Child Poverty, other Stronger California partners like Parent Voices, and other allies who really worked during this fight to lift up the voices and stories of these people most affected, like the youth that you mentioned, who was facing risks due to the cuts, and other families that were facing really extreme potential cuts to their safety and security and health due to these potential cuts. So I just think it's so important to lift these stories up, and it's something that's central to our advocacy in Stronger California, that we follow the lead of the community members who are most affected and really want their voices to be the ones that are heard by legislators, by the governor in these fights. So thank you for sharing that story, and we celebrate the win with you from this past budget year. I want to finally ask, what do you foresee in the coming year in terms of the budget fight in this anti-poverty space?
Well, thank you. And again, it is the partners like Parent Voices. There's a group called Student Parents Are Reimagining CalWORKS. There's organizations like Dolores Huerta Foundation. There are so many that are really like showing the way of doing that deep community work, and we're honored to partner with them. As you laid out, we are unfortunately going to continue to have some ongoing challenges in navigating the state's budget and to fulfill our mission to end deep child poverty and to cut poverty in half by 2030. And that's in part due to the fact that the state is expected to once again have a deficit, much, much, much smaller, approximately $2 billion, but that is still a significant amount. And we are now facing a situation in which there are discussions nationally, in the federal government, about potential significant cuts to core programs, in addition to the programs we've talked about, to Medicaid, Medi-Cal in California, to the Affordable Care Act, to other places in the budget. And the California Budget and Policy Center has analyzed that approximately 1/3 of our state general fund is actually federal funds. And so if there are significant threats to that funding out of Washington, D.C., or if there are attacks on our core values here in California, on reproductive rights, on LGBTQ plus youth, on immigrant communities, that takes additional resources too. And we're really grateful to see the governor, the attorney general, the legislative leadership already stand up to say that this is going to be a priority. But in a situation in which resources are limited, you can start to see some of the constraints and the dynamic of needing additional resources to both, continue our progress and also to navigate a very challenging state-federal relationship. There are also some absolute bright spots that I would be remiss if I didn't discuss. So one example is that California has been selected for national pilots. The federal government has awarded California, along with Ohio, Minnesota, Maine, and Kentucky, to have innovations to center families and improve work outcomes in our CalWORKS program. And it's really exciting to see the federal government take a new direction, and that we need to have alternatives to the failed compliance and punitive orientation of the program, and really look at centering families, addressing barriers, and supporting real pathways out of poverty. So we couldn't be more excited. We're very proud of California's application, grateful to the Department of Social Services and the governor's office and the entire team that's put that forward. And so that's a place where we're excited to make progress. But we know that more is needed across the safety net. We need to have the true cost of care supported for our child care workers. There's much more to do to support our foster youth. And there's a lot of programs that also are facing cuts, such as To Our Promised Neighborhoods, who are on the front lines of community, making sure that families have trusted places to go during these stressful times we're in, stay connected to those benefits, draw down available federal resources. So I would say, in summary, what we really need is also an honest conversation about revenues in California. We have the wealth. We have the fourth, fifth largest economy in the world. So we need to right-size our revenues so that we can have a more equitable future, both in terms of how we are funding our government and providing the kinds of investments and services we know can lead to a future free from poverty, in which every child is valued and free.
Thank you, Andrew. I so appreciate this conversation with you, because this past year's fight to ensure adequate funding for our most vulnerable communities was a big fight, and it was a really exciting win, as you've heard about today. I really appreciate getting to discuss it with you, and I want to make sure everyone knows that we will continue to fight for all of the people and communities within California. If you want to get involved and learn how you can support these types of anti-poverty priorities, as well as other priorities on advancing economic security for women and families, please check out our website, which is strongerca.org, and get involved that way. You can sign up for email updates and also hear how you'll be able to come up to Sacramento if you would like to support this type of advocacy and more. So thank you so much, Andrew, for all that you do and all that Grace End Child Poverty does, and for being such a valued partner within Stronger California and beyond. We really appreciate it, and you.
Back at you. Thank you for having me.